A child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. What is an example of this that you've seen or experienced firsthand? Does anyone know the actual story of King Shaka Zulu? He was literally that guy. Shaka was born as an illegitimate son of a Zulu, and was thus rejected by the Zulu settlements. He spent his childhood growing up in his mother's settlements and was then lent an army, which he used to take over the Zulu tribe. One of the greatest, but most intense, African warriors and monarchs of all time. I went to school with a kid who seemed a little disturbed. Maybe it's just my bias, but he definitely seemed like the school shooter type. Well, no one liked this kid and constantly picked on him. Once in some random class in 7th grade I asked him if he wanted to be my partner for some dumb little assignment. We chatted in class for the rest of the year. Toward the end of high school he told me I kept him from some bad speep by being his best friend. I literally only talked to him in class for a few months, and by that point hadn't talked to him in years. Embrace everyone, folks. You never know whether it might change someone's life. It takes many acts of hatred to break a child's spirit. With one act of kindness, you saved it. Thanks, man. You did good. I knew a girl a few years back who I think is a decent example of this. She was diagnosed with AD back in primary school and was shunned by her whole family because of it. As a result, she had low self-esteem and slowly grew a profound hatred for people, which resulted in everyone at school hating her, and as a result her hatred grew more. After her 17th birthday she ran away, but before she did she had spent about 5 years gathering dirt on everyone who wronged her. She released it all, which resulted in her parents splitting and a bunch of other kids being expelled or getting into speep with their parents, and if memory serves me correctly, one kid even got disowned because of what everyone found out about him. She ended up running up to a family friends of mine and is still working on rebuilding her life. It's a shame because she is one of the nicest people I know and is very honest person. Everyone just treated her like crap, so she burned it all. Talk about going in style. Kid went to school. He was in special behavioral classes, and then was put into our class in 4th grade. My teacher was hard on him. One day, the kid had a tantrum and threw a chair. He was sent back to the special classes, which probably destroyed him. He continued on, and in high school, was one of the freaks. Always wore a trench coat in Texas. Mind you, was into nerdy things. I talked to him sometimes, but wouldn't really call him a friend. More just nice to him. He would be reading a AD&D book and we'd chat about that. Being my uncle got me into RPGs. In 11th grade, school went into lockdown for some unknown reason. Found out he committed suicide in one of the school bathrooms. Heard he wrote letters to faculty and friends prior to doing it. I don't know if this is the right interpretation, but it is quite literal. I had a friend in elementary school who was neglected by his mom and beat by his dad. One day at school he told me he was going to get revenge, and I didn't really think of it. The next morning on the news we saw a report on a child who had caused a gas explosion by pouring gas on his parents while they were sleeping and throwing a match on them. He lost his right leg and had burns all over his lower body. And he killed both of his parents. He never went back to public school until the 6th grade when he finally showed up. I asked him where he'd been and he said the hospital, and then juvenile detention. TLDR. Child gets abused so he blows up his parents. You got an interesting friend there. I work with kids who have mental health issues. Many of them have attempted suicide, ran away, self-harm, or have an addiction of some kind by their mid-teens. They always have some kind of traumatic family life that's pushed them to that problem. One thing we see again and again is the poor kid who comes in after the parent/guardian has belittled them and told them what a piece of garbage they are for years. Eventually the kid starts acting out, which the adult uses as proof that he/she was right all along about the kid being an awful piece of speep. One kid I worked with was in and out of treatment programs for a couple of years and had exactly this kind of parents. Father was always on the road driving a truck and checked out when he was at home. Mom was personality disordered and extremely emotionally and verbally abusive. One day, while his father was on the road, this boy murdered his mother by bludgeoning her to death with a hammer while she slept in. Then he kept her body in the house for a few days, abusing the corpse before stuffing her remains into the trash can and leaving them on the curbside for pickup. I once attended a birthday party with a bouncy castle. The birthday kid and their friends kicked the younger sibling and his friend out. So they unplugged it and watched everyone's dismay as it deflated. Way to go, Mason. Badass moves for a 12-year-old. Good lord. If Mason is 12, what kind of older siblings/teenagers are renting a birthday bouncy castle? Is that the cool thing these days with the local youths? Hell yes, bouncy castles are the speep. I'm a behavioral interventionist at a middle school. My job is technically to pull disruptive students out of class, get them redirected, then back into their classroom. Most of my job is actually a sounding board and an understanding ear to kids who struggle. My entire job is an example of that quote. The neglect and abuse of some of those kids will break your heart. So much respect for this role. All the very best with it. I go a police call to go by a school. I arrived and I see a teacher holding a small kid back and the other kid who looked like he just got hit by a bus. His arm looked backwards. His face was bloodied. He had hair ripped out. Was on the floor as paramedics took him to the ambulance. I arrested the kid while I had to question him, he said. And I quote, "I want to be noticed." It haunted me as I sent out a report to do a background check on the parents. Turns out the kid was being neglected, and at school teachers reported that others would push past him and shove him and not even notice him. He was smiling as he then said, "People finally looked at me. It's been so long since that I felt horrible," as I passed the case to a different person as I couldn't handle it. I'm not sure it applies here, but that's the first thing that came to mind when I saw this. Edit. I speak French. Filled out the forms in French. I'm that good at English. This happened in Quebec, where French is the main language. Or at least where I was. My brother. My family wasn't loving. I coped it with my venturing out and exploring on my own. I would leaving early each day and explore nature. Only coming home for food. My brother coped with the lack of love with sex, drugs, fighting, parties, and theft. He had a super distorted view of needing love, and he really acted like if he wasn't getting love, then the world deserved to burn. He went into prison in his teens. He got out in his 20s. Tried to be good for a year, but couldn't find his concept of love, so he started burning the village again. Went back in. Got out years later. Tried to go clean and this time found love. But he pushed himself too hard to be lovable. He developed a super personality built on meth. He did drugs to keep up. Lost his love. And started to burn the village down again. The last time, the local sheriffs ended the cycle. He wasn't going back in. During the road chase, they filled his windshield with bullets and he veered off a cliff and died in the dirt. It was the headline of the local news. I think I may forever compare my life to my brother's. How could we be so different? We had the same parents and endured very similar pains. But I didn't choose to burn down the village. I chose to distance myself and survive. He went village didn't have a chance. I'm sorry that happened to you both. I don't know if it 100% fits, but I will share anyway. There's this one kid I went to high school with. He was incredibly sheltered by his parents to the point where he couldn't even leave his driveway or even watch most shows on the Disney Channel. All of a sudden his parents have a change of heart and give him a lot more freedom. Well, he gets involved with the wrong people online and ends up a neo-Nazi. Let this be a lesson in why you shouldn't shelter your kids. Well, that escalated quickly. A child who is not embraced by the village